Hello and welcome. I am Scrapperlock, and this is City of Heroes on the Rebirth server. I'm back after having a little bit of a break. Went on a trip, but I'm back, and we are now doing some Steel Canyon contacts. So we're starting with Trevor Seaborn, who's going to ask me to speak to the Hero Core analyst in King's Row. So this is just going to be more tutorial stuff, and then hopefully we'll come back and he'll give us a mission. Um, So as we go, I want to talk a little bit about player agency. I've mentioned this, we've discussed this before on this channel. Um, but I want to get some thoughts out because one of the D&D advice channels, Dungeon Craft, just put out a video, not specifically about D&D, but about game mechanics and fear. And the person who owns that channel, Professor Dungeon Master as he calls himself, who I normally agree with, said some things that I simply don't agree with, and I'm going to, I guess, debate him a little bit here. Not that anybody on his channel is going to notice because he has a huge giant following, and I have like 3 people watching my videos at a time. But what he started with was talking about things like Call of Cthulhu and Dungeons and Dragons as 2 examples of how when an enemy has the ability to, in D&D, frighten you, such as a dragon with frightful presence, or the ability to cause a sanity check that could cause you to lose sanity in Call of Cthulhu, such as if you see a dead body rising or something like this. These mechanics sound cool at first, he claims, but they take away player agency. So his example is in Call of Cthulhu. When you see something frightening, you make a sanity check, and if you lose more than, I think it's 5 sanity all at once, you go temporarily insane, and then I guess you roll on a table and your character might like flee screaming from the room or curl up in the fetal position. One way or another, you basically get taken out of the scene. And he argues that this isn't a lot of fun for the player because oftentimes it's kind of the climax of the session, right? They've been investigating some mystery through the whole session, and now that they're here and they're meeting this weird and evil creature that man was not meant to know about, and they finally have a chance to confront it, they fail a roll and they're basically out of the rest of the session, and they don't get to enjoy the climax. Now, I understand that this is probably somewhat unsatisfying, but that's the way the mechanics are, and although that result might not be satisfying, it is not taking player agency away. There's a crash site, clear Hellions out. Oh, is this going to be Bonefire? I wonder if it is. Not yet. So is this taking away player agency? Well, I guess in a certain technical sense, it is, in the sense that, if you roll on the table and it says you have to curl up in a fetal position, then as a player you don't get to really role play anything else. All you get to do is role play how you curl up into a fetal position. But this is sort of a fallacious argument because there are many circumstances under which a player, because of the mechanics of the game and because of a roll you made with your agency and your own dice, after building a character with your own agency who maybe doesn't have resistance to this type of sanity check or what have you, you made the roll, right? And then the effect is applied to your character. And it isn't taking agency away to apply an effect to your character. What happens if that same character, instead of being the victim of a sanity check, was shot with a pistol and took so much damage that they died? Is that, quote-unquote, taking player agency away? I mean, it is in the sense that your ability to keep playing the character has been removed, but that's kind of how we agree that role-playing games are supposed to work. Your character can take damage. If we say that anything you don't want to happen to your character can't happen, then when you hit my character and do damage like these guys are doing to me right now, I say, well, I don't. That's taking away my agency. I don't want to take damage here, and your character basically becomes invulnerable. Another example he gave was the dragon fear ability. It's got this area effect. Every frightful presence, anybody who looks on it can be forced to make a fear check by the dragon. Basically a saving throw. It's, I think, a wisdom saving throw, and if you fail the saving throw, you are frightened. The frightened condition applies. You cannot move closer to the dragon, right? So that's taking away your agency for where to move. You cannot move deliberately closer to the dragon, and you have disadvantage on all attacks against it and saving throws and ability checks against it. Okay. So now he's arguing for this part, not only that rolling on a table and finding out that your character would curl up in a fetal position is taking agency away, but that that having disadvantage is taking player agency away, i.e. applying a condition. Many conditions cause you to have disadvantage. It's just simply inconceivable to me that you could argue that having disadvantage, basically a penalty to your attack, is taking agency away. Is it his assertion that in the Champions game, if a villain does a presence attack and your character faints from fear because the guy quadrupled your presence, is taking agency away? Is it his contention that if the dragon breathes fire on a character and knocks him to 0 hit points and causes him to go into death saving throws, and so now all the player can do for the next 4 or 5 rounds is just roll death saving throws and hope not to die, is that taking player agency away? Well, it's certainly a lot like being, paralyzed in fear. If the characters are fighting a basilisk and you fail your saving throw against the basilisk, you're turned to stone. Is that taking player agency away? If so, then we have to take half the monsters out of D&D. Lots of monsters cause fear. Lots of monsters cause paralysis. Lots of monsters cause incapacitation. Any attack that does enough hit points to put you to 0 would have to be eliminated, because now you don't have agency when your character is lying on the ground unconscious. Where does it end? I don't actually see the difference between saying to a player your character is frightened and must run away, and saying to a player you have 0 hit points and you're now on the ground. Your character's now on the ground. In both cases, the player can't actually do anything. And yes, to a certain degree, from the perspective of time wasted and just sitting there watching the game be played while you're not doing anything. I've said many times, you come to play D&D not to watch other people play it. You come to play Call of Cthulhu not to watch other people play it. But it has to be understood in any game that's a role-playing game where characters can be damaged or whatever, that there will be times when your character will be knocked unconscious. This happens in Champions. It happens in Savage Worlds. There will be times when your character is knocked unconscious. And when your character is knocked unconscious, you kind of can't do anything as a player. And if we say that that can never happen because it's taking player agency away, then there's really no point to playing the game, right? Look at this game here. And I've mentioned this, I think, when I was playing a Mastermind and we were talking about this, that, this character can be mezzed. I have mez defense now. I don't like to be mezzed. But she can still be mez sometimes. And my Mastermind never had mez defense. There's a boss, right? Now, so you fight an elite boss or an arch villain. And there's 2 bosses here, right? This is going to be a really hard fight because I don't have any luck. So we're going to just have to try to do as much damage as we possibly can to these 2 bosses and just pound them. And rely on our fury and our healing. And that was probably stupid because now I'm going to aggro the other guys, right? But if these guys defeat me, they're not taking my agency away by defeating me. It's just how it goes, right? You sometimes get into a tough fight and you lose. Losing is not taking away your agency. I had tons of agency here. I could have not gone into this mission. I could have not straight up attacked these bosses, which is probably what I should have done because it looks like I'm going to die. I'm not getting my agency taken away here when I faceplant, which is what's about to happen. See if I can get away from him. Nope. See, I faceplanted. Did that take my agency away? Well, in the sense that My controller stops working and I have to go to the hospital. Yeah, but it's not taking my agency away in an unfair way. It's not taking away my ability to control my character within the confines of the rules. And I think that's where some of the confusion lies. Now, I do understand, Professor Dungeon Master is an experienced guy. He knows, that um, that players can't always expect to not be hit and not take damage and that sort of thing. But again, if you're going to argue that fear as an effect is taking agency away and all it's doing is saying you have to run away for a while, how is it not that knocking a character out or killing the character is taking agency away? And if you're going to say that anything that takes agency away is bad, then we can't kill characters, we can't knock them unconscious, we can't mez them, right? What happens with a charm spell? What happens with a hold person spell? What happens with a hypnotic pattern spell where you're just sort of staring at the ground? All of these things are causing players to have a restricted number of roleplay choices, right? They can't just roleplay whatever they want. Roleplaying whatever you want is not the definition of agency, right? Agency is you get to make a choice or a set of you get to make a choice from among a set of options within the parameters of the game system, right? So here, I couldn't choose to just walk up to the bosses and be invulnerable. I had to choose within the parameters of the game system. Why is this door even here if it's locked, but you can get to both sides? I had to choose within the parameters of the game system how I was going to make my attack given my inspirations. Now, I had options. I could have said I'm going to run out, go to a vendor, and get the right inspirations. Instead, I said, nah, I'll attack these 2 red bosses. I think I can do okay. Right? That was a choice. Once I entered into the combat, I was going to lose that combat because I didn't have the right setup. Well, that was on me, right? Additionally, your character's build is your choice, right? You chose what abilities, powers, in this case, enhancements and stuff to put on your character. And if you didn't choose properly, then you made bad choices, and those choices are part of your agency, right? So in a game like Call of Cthulhu, when you oh, look at that, completed the mission and we leveled up. In a game like Call of Cthulhu, right, well, you don't randomly roll your characteristics, and your characteristics determine in part how much sanity you have, right? Your character was designed by you. You chose to set up stats that gave you only a 45 sanity. So if you lose a bunch of sanity, a percentage of your sanity that causes you to go temporarily insane, well, maybe you should have designed your character differently. That was agency. Similarly, you're the one who opened the Necronomicon and read it. You chose to do that with your character. Now, if your character, upon reading the Necronomicon, goes screaming into the hills, freaking out because he failed a sanity check, well, maybe you should have given yourself a better sanity, and maybe you shouldn't have read the Necronomicon if you knew your sanity was low. These are the choices. That's the agency. Not, I'm going to ignore the roll because it would lead to some unpleasant play. Alright, let's see. What are we going to get here? Mind over body is what? Highly resistant to smashing, lethal, and psionic. That would be super useful. We are 3 and 3 here, so actually it's time to take one of these. And Power Siphon does what? It gives me plus 7.5% chance to hit. That's it? That's our buff? Recharge time very long. So it's a 2-minute recharge time. They can drain strength from enemies and add strength to me. This effect will stack 5 times. I see. It lasts for 20 seconds. That's kind of lame. I don't know if I'm going to like this one. We'll see. I mean, obviously, I'm going to have to put recharge enhancers on it and get it down to 1 minute. And then it'll last 20 out of every 60 seconds, which is kind of meh, but it's all right. Yeah, so, the idea here is that this is my agency, right? I picked Power Siphon. If that's an ineffective power, and I then walk into a battle and get my butt handed to me and faceplant, the fact that I have to go to the hospital now is not taking away my agency. My agency consisted in these choices that I've made here, and these choices that I have made here with slots and all of that. Those are my choices. That's my agency. Right? I'm not losing agency because I have to follow a story arc, right? When you're on a story arc in City of Heroes, you have to follow it. And that doesn't mean I don't have player agency. It's part of the game to follow story arcs. I get onto them on purpose, right? My agency is I go looking for them and I take them, and once I'm on them, I go on all the missions. That's not taking away your agency. It's part of the game. So yeah, I have to disagree respectfully with Professor Dungeon Master, with whom I normally agree. I don't think you should eliminate the fear mechanics of a game just because a player might be kind of knocked out of the battle due to a bad roll. One of the examples he gave, he said, like, at the end of as I said, at the end of his adventures, usually at the end of the session, you get onto some bad evil monster, and then if you roll the fear mechanic and you fail, you run away and you miss the final battle. And then he described a scenario in which he was playing with a couple of players, and he didn't force the player to make that fear check roll, or didn't force I think it was his wife. He didn't force her to roll on the temporary insanity. Right? She failed the sanity check, and he said, "What do you do?" And she said, "I run out screaming." And it was like, yeah, she chose to do it. She chose to do it. And we're going to skip this mission because I don't like these. She chose to do it, but the effect was still the same. Are we on a story arc? I don't know. Oh, this is the fortune teller mission. So that's good. Is that another mission teleporter? Yeah, let's use it. The effect was still the same. She still missed the battle. And what happened? She, as a role player, looked at this. I badly failed my sanity check, and what my character should do here is run screaming from the room. Right? Well, that's all that the table is telling you, right? It's giving you a list of possible effects that temporary insanity could have. And as a game master, I would have no problem showing the table to the player and saying, pick one. But you're going to have to do one of these. What you can't do is say, I'm going to stand in here and keep fighting and not be affected by the fear. No, you failed a sanity check. You have to be affected by the fear. Same thing with a dragon. You can get rid of disadvantage by getting advantage, right? And so a smart player would be able to figure out how to get advantage against the dragon while he has disadvantage because of the fear. Can't move closer, you can't get into melee range, but there are lots of other ways to gain advantage over somebody, like having your familiar come in and buffet the dragon and take the help action and give you advantage, and then your advantage negates the disadvantage and you just attack normally. And by the way, even if you have disadvantage against somebody, you're still getting to choose how you attack and what you're going to do, right? And as a consequence, you're still getting agency. You're still choosing what you get to do. You're just doing it at negatives. That's not a loss of agency. I think a lot of people make mistakes about agency, and they seem to think that it means doing something that only doing things that the player approves of the character doing. That's not what agency means. Agency means you get to make meaningful choices. Not all the time. Just basically some of the time. Right? You sometimes, during a session, will get to make meaningful choices. And sometimes you don't get to make choices because it's just not a moment when a choice is called for. And so when you're not in a moment when a choice is called for, that doesn't mean your agency was taken away. It's just you don't have a choice right now. Well, I mean, let's take an example. I just came back from my sister's, and she lives far away, and I had to come down Route 95 and Route 85, and so you get stuck in traffic, and you can't go anywhere. You're just in bumper to bumper traffic. Is my agency as a driver being taken away? No, I'm just stuck in traffic right now, and sometimes you just are. And that doesn't mean that anything bad has happened to you. It's not unfair. Nobody's treating you badly. It's just sometimes there's traffic, and sometimes you just have no choice but to sit in it. And yes, it's a game, and we're all here to have fun. But part of the fun is the challenge. And Professor Dungeon Master has repeatedly complained in 5th edition that there's not as much challenge as he thinks there should be. And he would like there to be more challenge, a greater amount of challenge, right? And, well, challenge means that sometimes the characters are going to be face planted. And sometimes the characters are going to be paralyzed. And sometimes they're going to be turned to stone. And all of those things prevent the players from doing what they want on a given turn. That doesn't mean that they don't have player agency. It just means that on this turn, they have to follow what the rules say. Following the rules is not taking away player agency. Taking away player agency happens when the GM does something like the king brings you into his chamber and tells you he wants you to go on this quest, and you have to accept. That's taking away player agency. Madness Mage. Alright, let's hit the ghosts first because they're nasty and they will debuff me. Alright, and now we'll take out the Madness Mage. Yeah, so agency is not I get to ignore the mechanics that I don't like because they will have an effect on my character that I preferred it didn't happen. Agency is not I get to ignore the mechanics I don't like because it means I'll miss some rounds of combat. Agency is I get to choose which of the plot hooks we follow to go on an adventure. That's player agency, right? Agency is I get to decide what edges and hindrances I'm going to take for my character and how I'm going to role play them out. Right? I mentioned this for champions before, that you are not free in champions to ignore the disadvantages that you don't like. That is not player agency. Right? When my one player who had a dependent NPC and did ignore it, and I kept saying to him, you can't keep ignoring your DNPC, you can't keep ignoring your DNPC, and he kept ignoring it, and so I had it get killed off, and I made him buy it off his character sheet, right? That was not me taking away his player agency, right? That was me giving him consequences for what he was doing with his player agency, which was ignoring his NPC, which you're not allowed to do in Champions. It breaks the rules, right? If my villain does a presence attack and scares the crap out of a couple of the heroes and I say, okay, one of the penalties of failing a presence attack is your character can be forced to basically blow an entire phase just standing there gaping at the enemy, right? You lose your phase. Basically, your next phase, you do nothing. You're not allowed to do anything this phase. Oh, you're taking away my player agency because I can't do anything. It's boring not to do anything. Well, that's what happens when you fail a presence attack, when you get beaten by a presence attack. Buy your character some presence defense next time, or get some higher presence, and this won't happen to you. You had the agency to choose not to put any points into presence. That's your player agency, right? If you're not going to put points into presence, don't complain to me when you get beaten by a presence attack. So, again, agency is not I only get effects that I want. Agency is not I can never be hit by something that causes me to be unable to use my turn in combat. sometimes, as a result of the role play, you're sitting things out. I was just watching a Deadlands, or listening to the podcast of a Deadlands show from the Wildcards group for their 5th season. I think it's the 6th episode. They split the party. 2 of them went one way and did one thing, and 2 of them went another way. And they had to watch each other for maybe 10 or 15 minutes while the other group was doing something. The guys who were watching had not lost agency. It just so happened that they had, by choice, decided not to group up. And this guy's just giving me nonsense mission, so I think we're done with him. And we'll try somebody else, like Athena Curry. You're not losing agency just because your character isn't going right now. You're not losing agency just because your character skipped a turn. That's not how it works. You're playing Monopoly and you lose a turn and you go to jail. You didn't lose player agency. That's just the way the game works. And sometimes you go to jail and sometimes you lose a turn. And yeah, it's always more fun to be able to use your turn than to be skipped. But that's the way the game plays, right? And so I simply disagree with him that you shouldn't use fear rolls and that sort of thing in games. I think you absolutely should. Now, it is the case that sometimes when you're rolling, right, some of the results might be a lot less fun to play out than others. And as a GM, like I said, I don't mind the idea of perhaps allowing the players to look at the chart and decide which of the effects they would like to roleplay. Or I might say, here are 2 or 3 effects you can choose between or roll between, right? So I might say something like, okay, you have either you can run away in fear or curl up into the fetal position. Roll a d4, and odd number is fetal position, even number is run away. Is this thing PBAOE? No, it's just plus self. Okay, so I don't need to be around them. It's not an attack. It's just a buff. And then that causes me to buff up with kinetic attacks. Okay. And that's them stacking and doing some bonus. So if each one of them in the stack does plus 7%, right, that gives us, what, plus 25% to hit? That's not bad. Right? Or it's damage. Plus damage. It's not plus to hit. So that should stack with our Fury, which is quite nice. So yeah, player agency. This bugaboo comes up all the time, and it's not that I don't think players should have agency. I absolutely think they should. But I think way too much is made of it, and way too many times people are talking about agency when what they really mean is people don't want anything bad to happen to their character, and they don't ever want to have to like skip a turn or be even a little bit bored for a little while. Yeah, it's a game. It should be fun as much as possible. But I'm sorry, as a role-playing game, sometimes sometimes there's a little bit of boring stuff. I mean, it happens. Right, especially because players have different tastes. So, for example, I had players in my Champions campaign, right? The guy who played the character, the martial artist Nightshade, whose DMPC got killed because the player was ignoring it. This guy, he was young, and he wasn't really into roleplay yet. Eventually, he did get into it, but at that point, he really wasn't into it. And you say, why is he playing a role-playing game? Well, he liked the tactics and the mechanics and the combat, right? Now, this guy would, like, he rolled his eyes whenever we got into a really heavy roleplay session, and he really didn't care for it that much. Meanwhile, we had another player who was really more into the role play, and he only found the combat so-so. Well, we got both of these players, okay, and they can't both be pleased at the same time. They're basically, their tastes were mutually exclusive. Now, they were friends with each other. Don't say, so you can't say, well, you shouldn't play together. They were friends. They wanted to play together. And we acknowledged and recognized as a group that, okay, people have different tastes, and everybody's going to be happy at a different time. So as a GM, I tried to put some good roleplay opportunities, and I tried to put some good combat opportunities. And during the combat, the role-playing guy was a little bored, and Nightshade's player was happy. And during the roleplay, the Nightshade's player was bored, and the other guy was happy. And so this happens, right? I wasn't taking agency away from Nightshade's player when there wasn't any combat. He just had to put up with a little bit of, this isn't my favorite thing. He didn't hate the roleplay, I don't think, but it just wasn't his thing, and he would have rather been in combat. Right? He would have been perfectly happy if all we ever did in Champions was fight combat, was have battles. He didn't even need a reason for the battle. He would have been perfectly happy to walk into my house and have me just have a battle map set up and say, okay, guys, place yourselves down on the map. We're going to have a battle. We're just going to assume that these guys have robbed a bank or something, and you're going to fight them. Right? And he would have been perfectly happy to do that, whereas my other players wanted a story. They wanted villains. They wanted story arcs and things like what we have here. And they would not have been happy to just start fighting and do combat. So, just because stuff's happening that you don't like doesn't mean agency has been taken away. And just because your character can't do something at the moment in this round doesn't mean that agency was taken away from you. And I can't disagree strongly enough with Professor Dungeon Master about this. I think that it's a mistake of the First Order to equate this sort of thing, oh boy, to agency. Look, I've got to run. Is this taking my agency away? No, I was dumb. I just went right into the middle of a fight that was too hard for me. I started trying to rescue a kidnapped victim when there was another spawn near me, and what I should have done was pull. And instead, I got overconfident, and I went in and tried to take on too many guys at once. Now I have to sit here and be bored and wait and not do exciting combat while my character heals up. Is that having my agency taken away? No. So, I don't know. I guess I'm belaboring this point, but I think that it really annoys me that so many times I hear about player agency when that's not what the person is talking about. They're talking about, I don't want to have anything bad happen to my character. I don't want to have anything negative happen to my character. And if I do, you're upsetting me and you're taking away my agency. It just doesn't work that way. That's not the way these games are supposed to work. Bad things happen to your character. That is not taking agency away from you. Can I see the problem? That was a lieutenant. And there's guys up there too. There are guys up there. So let's pull them back. Yeah, there's just too many of them right there. I'll be so glad when I can get rid of the Ghost Slaying Axe and the Nemesis Wand. Or Nemesis Staff, I guess, more accurately. Yeah, I don't know, for some reason I thought the Siphon power was like drawing power away from... The power itself was drawing energy away from nearby enemies. I think that's more of a kinetics controller ability, and I got them confused. Alright, so we have 3 more scientists to rescue, and we have to defeat Pating. Yeah, like everybody always talks about player agency, and I always think about, and I think I mentioned this before. I always think about the old Inigo Montoya quote from The Princess Bride. You keep using that word. I don't think you know. I don't think it means what you think it means. You keep using the word agency. It doesn't mean what you think it means in role-playing games. Right? It might mean something different in a non-role-playing context, but in a role-playing game, it is not taking away your agency to make your character be mind controlled. It's a legit power in the game. You're aware that it exists. If you don't want to be mind controlled in Champions, buy Ego Defense. It's that simple. Or buy up your ego. Both of them will help. And do them both, buy your ego up to 15 or something, and then get yourself 8 points of ego defense. Right? And now somebody's got to roll at least a 21 just to overcome the base ego, and would have to roll like an 84 to get you to do something you violently oppose. But I mean, every game has mind control abilities. In Savage Worlds, there's a power called Puppet. Yeah, the bad guys get to use that power. It's not only available to players. It makes the game too easy if powers like that aren't available to players, to NPCs. Right? Because now the NPCs are basically being crippled. They're being nerfed. And they can't do as much as the players can do, which makes them weaker than they are supposed to be, because they're not able to use some of the abilities that they're supposed to have. Speaking of AoEs, I definitely need some AoEs here. I don't know if there are any in the kinetic set. Not really sure. I think there might be one. Yeah, this one, Repulsing Turret. That's like an AoE cone or something. Again, now, I understand his point, and that it can be pretty unpleasant as a player to miss the whole final climactic battle because your character failed a sanity check. But again, and sometimes you just get bad die rolls. But again, your agency consists of trying to design your character and make in-character choices that don't lead to you failing that sanity check. Right? Again, don't read the Necronomicon, and you won't fail the sanity check from reading it. Right? Buy up your, buy whatever the stat is that gives you higher sanity, and you won't fail the sanity check. And that's it. That's where the agency comes in. You make the character choices, and then the consequences of those choices, you don't get to ignore them and call it agency. You don't get to ignore the faceplant in City of Heroes and say it's my agency that I don't have to faceplant. That's not how it works. At least that's not how it should work. And again, I think a lot of people use agency incorrectly. And we've talked about this at some great length while playing this game. Remember, there was the example of the paladin and the clerics, and they were playing in a game where the GM made the decision, and I don't agree with the decision, and I said this when I told the story initially. She made the decision that these players had done things that she believed violated the tenets of their character's faith, and that as a consequence, she decided that the gods are going to withhold the spells from the characters. And so when they did a long rest to try to get their spells back, she said, you don't get any spells back. And they wanted to know why, and she said, because you've violated the tenets of your faith and your gods are not looking favorably upon you. And this player actually said she doesn't have a right to do that. She's interfering with my agency for my character because I designed this character sheet a certain way, and my agency consists of basically being able to play it in that way. And that's not the way it works. The GM gets to decide how the gods react to your character, and if you want to be able to get your spells, your agency consists of you not doing things that blaspheme against your god, right? And so the players made a choice. Now, to be fair, I don't think the players made a bad choice, and I don't think I think the GM was kind of wrong about how she was interpreting things, but nevertheless, once the GM made that interpretation, the players had lots of opportunities to do something different and chose to do the thing that she thought was a blasphemy. Right? Well, that's your choice. That's your agency. You chose to blaspheme. Now your character's gods aren't going to listen to the prayers. That's agency. Right? It's the results of the agency you expressed. And I think a lot of times players don't want the consequences, the obvious negative, serious negative consequences that should come from what they're doing. They don't want those consequences, right? They just want a bunch of freebies. They just want to be able to run roughshod over the campaign, kill everything in it, not obey the tenets of any faith or role play being a cleric in a real way. And then they want to not suffer any consequences and just have the game work as if they haven't done anything wrong. Right? Well, I get to ignore consequences is not agency, it's cheating. Right? For me to ignore the consequence of rushing in and aggroing too many enemies by typing in a cheat code so that I could basically be invulnerable for the duration of the fight, so I don't pay the price of the fact that I didn't look before I leaped and I got sort of gobsmacked by a bunch of enemies that I didn't realize were there. I mean, that's not agency, right? That's a cheat code. Cheat codes are not agency. Cheating is not agency. All right, that's enough of that rant. I'm sure I'll have many more rants in the future, probably somewhat about this. The main reason I bring it up is because Professor Dungeon Master recently put out very recently put out a video about this. At the time of this recording, by the time I post it, that video will be a couple months old. I'll try to see if I can remember to link it in the chat, but I might forget by the time this thing gets posted. So I do apologize if there's no link, but you should be able to find it. Just look up Dungeon Craft and look for his video on fear checks. Okay, so we can't talk to her yet, so we're going to go to Steel Canyon. Actually, are we going to go to Steel Canyon? Or do we want to go somewhere else? I don't remember where this puts you. Yeah, I think this is going to be really far away, isn't it? Yeah, this is really stupid. That's annoying. So now I'm going to have to take the train to the south side of Talos Island, or sorry, Steel Canyon, because the teleporter puts me in this weird spot. It would be nice if the Rebirth guys actually reconfigured the departure point so that it was in just dumps you by Valkyrie or something, and positron in the middle of Blythe Square, right? Or something. It's the idea that you get dumped over here by this signature story arc contact is just preposterous. It should be in the middle of the zone or near the train station or something. As you may notice, I'm hopping along the monorail. There's really no great reason for doing it at this point, but one reason I kind of like doing it with lower level characters is because nobody's up on the monorail, and so if you stay on the monorail, um, you won't get hit. And I went the wrong way, right? Because Athena Curry is actually over. I was thinking we were going to the other contact. Athena Curry is actually over at the train station. So even more so, we just wanted to be at this train station. But yeah, I go over the rails, the monorail, because there's no aggro up here, and you can pretty easily bounce off of it, and it'll take you straight where you need to go. With a couple of silly curves. I often wonder, like with these curves, like what is the point of this? Like why did it curve out and back? Right? It's high enough to go over the streets here, so why not just go straight from there to here, you know? A little strange. But I guess they wanted to make it look more dynamic, like it really was going to different parts of the city. I don't know. All right, let's talk to Athena. She introduces us to a new contact, and we will stop here. We're not on a story arc for her, are we? We are not. But hopefully we will get on one soon. Until next time, guys, I am Scrapperlock, and this is City of Heroes on the Rebirth server.